Hello and welcome to Catalyze Music Academy. My name is Zaak Kerstetter. I'm an Ableton Certified Trainer, and I'm in a different corner today, as you may have noticed, which means it's about to get real. I've had a bunch of people recently ask me a little bit about sends and returns. What are they? How do they work? Why do I use them? So I wanted to do a little video kind of demystifying return tracks and how you can start integrating them into your workflow and some of the tracks you're already making. If you are an advanced producer and you've been using return tracks quite a bit, this is probably not the video for you. However, I'm most likely going to follow this up with another video on more kind of advanced techniques and maybe some different kind of routing options for doing more advanced kind of concepts with return tracks. This is just going to be basic overview, how to get started. So before we dive into it, I do want to let you know if you are enjoying the content on the channel, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, tell your friends, all the YouTube stuff. It is super helpful for me, and I greatly appreciate it. What is a return track? In Live, you start with two of them. You got one that's a reverb and one that's a delay. And a return track is essentially a track that can only hold audio effects. That's it. There's no MIDI, there's no instruments, there's nothing else, just audio effects. If you are in the session view, you can't even automate it. However, if you jump over to the arrangement view and we look in here, we can see that you can actually automate things on the arrangement view, but no automation on the session view when it comes to your return tracks. On top of that, you only start with two of them. However, you can have more of them if you want. To add more return tracks, you can hit Option Command T, and that creates, in this case, return track C. And you'll notice that the send knobs connect to the return tracks. So send A goes to return A, send B goes to return B, and now that we have a send C, we now have a C send knob, or return C. So we can keep on making new return tracks, and it'll keep on adding send knobs to go with them. On top of that, Live defaults with one as a reverb and one as a delay, although I accidentally deleted it. Let me add that back in there. But you can have any effect you want on here. So you could have a delay, and you could also mix it with other effects. They don't have to be reverbs and delays. However, that's the most common way to use them for reasons that we'll take a look at very, very shortly. So any effects that you want, as many effects as you want, but only effects. That's all they do. So if we want to start applying a return track to, say, one of our tracks here I got this little snare, nice little dry sounding snare. If I want to add, say, some reverb to it, I could take this send knob and start turning this up. And this is going to take the volume that is going out the mix section here to the master, and it's going to send it in addition over here to this return track. So if I turn this up, we can hear that going over here. I turn it down, you can't hear anymore. So this is controlling the amount of volume that's going into either return A or return B. That's it, that's all it does. If I want to do the same thing on return B, you can hear the delay on there. So, or we can do both at the same time. So you can use these to basically add in different kinds of effects. Now you may be asking yourself, well, what's the point? Why would I not just, if I wanted to add a delay here, why would I not just go to the delay, toss it on here like this? This is called using an insert effect, because we are inserting the effect directly onto that track. And there's a lot of good reasons for that we will be talking about in just a second. The main reason of those specifically has to do with time-based effects, meaning reverbs and delays. Because the way a dry wet knob works on a reverb and a delay is a little different than other effects. So if we take a look at the dry wet here, dry wets control the amount of the effect, like the amount of the dry signal versus the amount of the affected signal. However, with time-based effects, it controls the volume of the original signal versus the volume of the delayed signal. So at 50-50, when I play a note here, the original signal and the first delay are the same volume. If I turn this down to like 20%, the original signal will be louder than the delays. If I turn this up to like 75%, the delays will be louder than the original signal. And you actually hear that. You can hear the first one's a little quieter and then the rest one's a little bit louder. And if I turn this all the way up to 100%, we don't hear the original signal. We only hear the delayed signal. So you're actually going to see the volume coming up here first, and then a second later it'll pop out over here. Like that. So this is especially important on sounds like this, on sounds like drums, where the transients and the punch and the impact of the sounds is very important. So if we were to try the same experiment with the reverb, the other main type of time-based effect, take a look at the volume. If I have 0% dry wet, we're sitting around -6, -7 decibels. But as I start to turn this up, check out what happens to the volume. If I go all the way down to 100%, or up to 100%, my volume is sitting at like -20 decibels. I just lost like 15 decibels of volume, and plus it sounds really far away, and I'm losing the kind of impact of that snare right there, right? So the way this works here is the dry signal is here, and the wet signal is here. As the wet signal goes up, the dry signal automatically goes down. It's kind of like a seesaw. However, if I were to try to do the exact same thing, but in this situation I use the send knob, the dry signal is going to be here, the wet signal is going to be here, and I'm going to start turning up the wet signal however much I want, but the dry signal always stays the same. So we don't lose our transients, we don't lose our impact of our drums or anything else that we feel like has really important transients. So now if I turn this up, we can hear we can get an absurd amount of reverb, but also still really be able to hear our sound. And then we can control this to get the proper amount of reverb to your taste or the genre, or however much you're feeling the reverb, you can get it just right by doing this. So it allows you specifically the ability to maintain volume and maintain transients when working with time-based effects, which is especially important for things like drums or like a plucked guitar, anything that's plucked and has a really killer transient, super important. It also allows you to get the exactly perfect right amount of your dry signal versus the exactly perfect amount of signal of your wet signal. So that's one of the main reasons you might want to start using these if you haven't been using your return tracks already. However, another really good reason you might want to use your return tracks is, say I have multiple sounds in my song. So say I've got like a piano over here, and I want this to sound like it exists in the same imaginary space as my drums. That's what reverb does. It creates the illusion of space. So I can start to turn this up. And I can get a reverb that sounds the same on multiple sounds. That way my vocalist doesn't sound like they're in a different room than my drummer, which is a different room than my bassist, etc. So you can create a cohesive sound by sending multiple tracks. You can send as many of them as you want to the same reverb or same delay or same effect, whatever you want. So that's one reason. Kind of on top of that, if you want to change one of the settings on this reverb, I can just change the setting here or do whatever I want, and it will be the same across all of them. So I don't need to go through, if I have 10 different reverbs, I don't need to change the settings on all 10 of them. I just change it one place. Kind of piggybacking on top of that, reason number 3 you might want to start using your return tracks is to save yourself CPU. So instead of having 30 different tracks with 30 different reverbs on them, which is going to crush your computer CPU, you could have 30 different tracks all going to one reverb, which not only creates that cohesive sound, but it also saves you a lot of computer processing power because you only have one effect doing all of the work. So saving yourself CPU, as well as the cohesive sound, as well as maintaining transients and volumes when you are doing your time-based effects are probably the 3 main reasons you should really start exploring your return tracks if you haven't been already. And then from there, you can really get into lots of interesting kinds of routing, doing submixes. You can daisy chain your return tracks together. You can do lots of cool stuff with it, but I think I'm gonna save that for another video. One other thing I did want to mention that I don't think I mentioned yet is when you are dealing with your return effects as opposed to your insert effects, you want to keep your dry wet at 100% because you're effectively using the send knob as your dry wet. So if this is at 50%, half of the signal you're sending over here is just your dry signal, which isn't really doing much for you. So when you're using your effects on your return tracks, dry wet at 100%, and then you use your send knob like a dry wet knob. Lastly, I do just want to mention that everybody has their own approach when it comes to setting up their return tracks. Some people like to use them for reverb, some people use them for delays, some people like to use them for mixing, some people like to use them for other kinds of processing. It really kind of depends on whatever your style is and what are the effects you like using a lot. Just to let you guys know, the way I set up my return tracks is I use 3 of them. I have one really realistic sounding reverb, which I usually use like the Valhalla vintage verb for just like a nice, crisp, clean sounding reverb. I have another return track with a more kind of atmospheric, surrealist kind of reverb, usually using Valhalla Shimmer. Both those are third-party plugins. They're excellent. Check them out. And then the third reverb I have specifically for my snare. I'm really picky about the way I process my snare, so I usually have a dedicated reverb track just for my snare, so I can get the settings just the way I want. And for that, I will usually use either Valhalla Vintage Reverb again, or the Convolution Reverb, or more recently, I've been using the Hybrid Reverb in Live 11. But I will usually also combine those with other effects. Sometimes I'll toss some delays on there. Go nuts with it. It's really up to you to experiment and have fun and see what you can do with it. And I would encourage you guys to try out lots of different effects beyond just reverbs and delays. But those are my three kind of go-tos when I start setting up my different return tracks. Although sometimes I'll go a lot deeper than that, and sometimes I won't use them at all. It really kind of depends. So if you enjoyed watching that, keep an eye out for another video coming real soon about more specifics about different ways that I will use return tracks creatively to do a lot of especially atmospheric kind of sounds or just processing for things like vocals. I will be making that hopefully pretty soon. If you are new to using return tracks and this video inspired you to try something out and experiment a little bit, let me know how it went. Did you come up with the cool setup for your return tracks? If so, put that in the comment section below. So once again, thanks for watching, and hopefully I will see you guys soon.